The military regime in Mali is under intense pressure to retain control, largely because of the shifting tactics of a jihadist movement in the past 2 months, from attacks on the army, a blockade instead on the fuel coming in to the country, seizing petrol tankers, blocking major highways, meaning the country is being starved of fuel, the price of petrol spiralling out of control, and energy needed for industry, including for the main export of the West African country, gold, seriously affected too. And a UN peacekeeping mission of French forces who've been deployed in 2013 to deal with the coup threat and insurgency left in 2021 and 2022 after being kicked out by the military junta in the aftermath of 2 coups there. And since, Russian paramilitaries welcomed to fill the vacuum. And some analysts are now saying Bamako could fall. Let's cross to Washington, D.C. Let's bring in Dr. Andrew Lebovich, research fellow with the Klinkendal Conflict Research Unit, a specialist expert on armed conflict, religious mobilization and jihadist groups such as JNIM or GNIM in Mali. Welcome to France 24, Dr. Lebovich. Let's start, Andrew, on the first, probably most prescient question for people. Could Bamako fall?
There's always a threat of further disruption in Mali, particularly given the intense situation, the fuel blockade, and ongoing tensions within the military government. I think the speculation that Bamako was on the edge of collapse was exaggerated, and we're seeing even in the last week and a half or so a bit of a relaxation in the situation. It still remains very, very tense. There are still JNIM forces surrounding Bamako in different areas and enforcing some checkpoints, some blockades of parts of the roadways. But there has been an effort both to break a bit of that stranglehold, and there's also been a movement of some JNIM forces out of the immediate area around Bamako as they've been needed elsewhere. So it does seem that things are becoming a little bit less tense, but of course it still remains a very complicated situation.
Tell us about JNIM. How big is the group? Where's its financing coming from?
So JNIM has grown significantly over the years. Of course, the group was formed or announced in 2017 out of a merger of different militant groups under the Al-Qaeda banner. So formed from Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, Ansar ad-Din, a group known as Katibat Messina, and several others, 5 in total. It is, as I said, it's grown significantly since then. The Washington Post recently estimated JNIM's level of fighters at about 6,000. I think the real number is probably somewhat higher than that, though it's impossible to get any real estimate for the group's strength. And they derive their income from a number of sources, very heavily weighted in favor of taxation or zakat under Islamic law, but then also other forms of taxation and revenue generation, including kidnapping for ransom. The organization had for a time moved somewhat away from kidnapping Europeans in particular, as the number of foreigners in Mali has decreased. But of course, they have for years been kidnapping and ransoming Malians, Burkinabe in Burkina Faso, and also Nigerian officials. And then recently, there was a reported windfall for the group from the kidnapping of a prominent Emirati hostage south of Bamako, which may have generated between 50 and 70 million dollars in ransom, or million euro in ransom payments. Now, of course, the actual number is lower for a number of reasons, but still, the group has been able to generate significant income from various parts of their operations.
I'm just trying to understand the extent of the strength right now of the military junta, the regime trying to combat them, and where the Russian paramilitary comes into this as well, and how these blockades are continuing. We're assuming that in the past few weeks, in the past few months, there is a continuing effort from the army to try to push them back, but it's clearly not working. What's your understanding of its strength?
Well, I think the military was caught somewhat off guard by the durability of this blockade, by the ability of JNIM to not only enforce the blockade, but to destroy large numbers of fuel trucks in several very spectacular attacks on the road from Senegal, but also the road south of Bamako toward Guinea, and then, of course, roads connecting the capital and Mali's second largest city, Sikasso, with Cote d'Ivoire. And so that did take some time to adjust. And then it also took time to mobilize assets, including Russian paramilitaries, the Africa Corps, to begin protecting the convoys much more closely. I think this effort has borne some fruit, again, in the last week and a half, 2 weeks, where the convoys have come under much closer protection, not just from the military, but from Russian paramilitary forces. And there's also just been a concentration of troops to protect these convoys as the situation became increasingly dire in Bamako. And so in Bamako, the situation is getting a bit better, as I said, not much, but a bit better. That said, in other parts of the country, the fuel shortages remain very severe. There are parts of central Mali where they have not had fuel and electricity for a month at this point, or even more in some more isolated areas. So it remains extremely serious, even if the situation is getting a bit better in Bamako.
To try to understand the wider geopolitics and how much of an effect it's having, that's kind of making a rod for its own back in getting rid of the French, getting rid of the UN peacekeeping mission, not being part of ECOWAS, the Economic Union, and being part of this other alliance with, I think it's called the Alliance of Sahel States, with Burkina Faso, with Niger as well, which have also got military regimes in power. Is that part of the reason it's so isolated? Because the question is, who can come in to help Mali?
I think it's a combination of factors. Certainly the regional and international isolation of the government has been a factor. The removal of certain military assets, but also intelligence cooperation with France and also with the United States has been a factor. At the same time, Mali has tried in different ways to strengthen their relationships with neighbors. This has been kind of a halting process. But with Senegal, for instance, Mali has tried to increase its military collaboration. There have been some discussions with the Ivorian authorities as well, and some information sharing and intelligence sharing. But yes, it's certainly been a factor. I think also the ongoing shift southward of the concentration of militant attacks and militant forces has also been a significant factor in this, and I think an enduring factor in the challenges the government is facing. Because right now, even though JNIM may not be able to sustain this blockade sort of permanently, what we're seeing is a much more durable implantation of JNIM forces in southern Mali near the border with Cote d'Ivoire, but then also in parts of Kai, near the borders with Mauritania and Senegal, and then, of course, in areas north of Bamako, where these forces have been present for years, but are establishing much more of an enduring presence. And that's going to be an ongoing challenge for the government for a number of reasons, because it means that increasingly the militant threat is everywhere in the country and can be everywhere. And so it's going to become much more difficult for Malian forces to respond to these threats. The situation has been getting progressively worse for years, even before the withdrawal of French forces and UN forces. So this is not something that began with that withdrawal, but it is getting worse. And in the meantime, this is one reason why. Oh, sorry.
No, I'm listening to you, but in the meantime, you have a population of what, 20 million or more stuck in the middle between a rock and a hard place, a military regime that was enforced upon it, now also a jihadist group. We're hearing some of the stories, people in Bamako struggling with daily living already. Conversations, tell me about what you've been having with people to understand what's actually going on, how ordinary people caught up in this are being affected in Mali.
It's incredibly challenging for everyone in Mali. Now, of course, there are some areas, Mali, particularly in rural areas, where people have been dealing with this for years, with insecurity, with the lack of state presence, and where, especially in central Mali and parts of northern Mali, communities have had to make their own arrangements, what are known as either peace deals or local survival pacts with JNIM in particular. In Bamako, the situation was extremely difficult for quite some time. People couldn't get gas, they couldn't run generators. So there's an enormous amount of concern about just the ability to do basic daily tasks. And even as that's gotten a bit better, other parts of the country are still seeing, as I said, this incredibly challenging situation that is impacting their daily life in myriad ways. And then there's ongoing concern about, again, other facets of daily life. Schools in Mali were closed for about 2 weeks. Some of them have just started opening up. But this has been massively disruptive to daily life across the country, and that's only going to get worse, particularly as we've seen J&M demonstrate this ability when they can concentrate forces to severely impact trade.
Let's talk about what would be a clearly huge motivation for the jihadists. The biggest export, 80% of its exports are gold. The pre-2025 estimates, the baseline estimate, 70 to 75 tons annually of gold, valued at $6 to $7 billion. Now that's down, we're told, by 2/3 at around 50 tons. So we're looking at maybe, $5.5 billion a year. Now, I want to quote this. This is the Russian Yadran Group. According to the regime in Mali, it's a sovereign ally. It's working with a Kremlin-backed and linked conglomerate aiming to process 100 tons by 2028. So we're talking about a motivating factor here for Russia to stay involved. What are the Kremlin doing right now?
Well, they're providing a significant amount of support through the Africa Corps, which of course took over earlier this year for the Wagner Group, the sort of famed and infamous Russian mercenaries. So yes, economic motivations are an important factor, but also of course geopolitical motivations. This has been an important space of expansion for Russian foreign policy. The Russian government has put significant emphasis over the last several years, in particular, in rehabilitating their presence in Africa, particularly in the Sahel and in West Africa. And so this is both an economic and a political and geopolitical priority for the Russian government. But again, one where we've seen, I would say, limited results for the moment. Even on the economic front, there's not much of a clear indication that Russia has been able to generate the kinds of, for instance, mining revenues that they were able to in the Central African Republic, for instance. The situation in the Sahel has proved much more complicated for them.
Really good to talk to you. Thank you, Andrew. Dr. Andrew Lebovich, Research Fellow with the Clickendale Conflict Research Unit in Washington, D.C.